Workers' Woes and Wage Wars, Part 2, Inequality and the Perils of the Factory, Tenements, Time Cards, and the Tyranny of Toil. What a riotous spectacle was the post-Civil War era, when the American landscape, once a pastoral quilt of yeoman dreams, was yanked into the maw of the Industrial Revolution. A seismic transformation, a land reborn not by grace or enlightenment, but by the thundering symphony of clanging steel and puffing locomotives. The Industrial Revolution swept across the United States like an over-caffeinated messiah, offering salvation not in the form of liberty or wisdom, but paychecks, smokestacks, and the charming scent of progress, which smelled suspiciously like soot and despair. It fundamentally altered the fabric of American life. Picture it, a nation, still licking its wounds from fratricidal strife, suddenly bewitched by the siren song of steam and steel. Railroads, those iron arteries, squiggled across the landscape, stitched the sprawling republic together, while the belching furnaces of steel, oil, and textiles expanded at a breathtaking pace, turning the air acrid and coffers fat. The gods of industry, steel magnates and oil barons, flourished like weeds in a neglected garden, erecting factories like temples to the gods of profit. Into this churning cauldron leapt millions, fresh-faced immigrants with stars in their eyes alongside native-born farm folk, who, having grown weary of coaxing crops from stingy soil, abandoned their pastoral Edens. Goodbye, chickens. Hello, child labor. The promise of steady wages, adventure, and new opportunities drew entire families into the orbit of factories, mills, and mines. The cities, those great grimy magnets, beckoned with promises of jingling coins and the thrill of something new. Why till the earth when you could join the urban circus, juggling shifts in factories, mills, or mines? And so they came, families, dreamers, desperados, pouring into the urban sprawl like moths to a sooty flame. For the first time, the American soul, once tethered to plow and anvil, hitched its wagon to the paycheck, traded the fruits of their own land or craft for the fickle mercy of the time clock. For the first time, large numbers of Americans became dependent on wages from large employers. This so-called Second Industrial Revolution, a period of rapid technological advancement spanning the mid-19th to early 20th century, was less a revolution than a cosmic prank as it irrevocably altered the American landscape. Steel grew cheaper, electricity crackled with Promethean glee, and machines multiplied like roaches in a tenement. Factories ballooned into monstrous hives, demanding ever more hands to feed their insatiable gears. This demand sparked one of the largest migrations in the nation's history. Between 1870 and 1920, over 25 million immigrants docked on these shores, most piling into the industrial crucibles of the Northeast and Midwest. Add to that the homegrown millions, nudged off farms by mechanized reapers, seduced by the city's siren call and drawn by the allure of city wages, joined the urban influx. Cities swelled, not with elegance or refinement, but with noise, grime, and a curious cocktail of ambition and tuberculosis. By 1920, the scales tipped. More Americans were city slickers than country bumpkins, outnumbering their rural kin for the first time in history. In 1860, a mere 20% of the populace called cities home. By 1920, over half had traded wide-open spaces for sardine can squalor. The shift to wage labor and migration to the cities marked a profound change. The promised land it was not. The city turned out to be a cruel jape. The reality of urban life for the burgeoning working class was often one of squalor and despair. Families found themselves stuffed into tenements, foul, airless warrens where sunlight feared to tread, and disease threw raucous parties. New York's Lower East Side became a human anthill, its population density a grim world record, as if the gods had decided to see how many souls they could cram into 1 square mile before the whole mess collapsed under its own misery. The urban laborer, far from basking in prosperity, was more likely to choke on coal dust, bedbugs, or despair. The workforce itself was a motley crew, men, women, even children, all toiling in a grim ballet of survival. Entire families clocked in for 12-hour shifts in mills where the air was thick with lint and peril. The independence and autonomy that had characterized the earlier agrarian and artisan economy gave way to a new reality defined by hierarchical relationships between employers and employees. This old agrarian dream of independence, of reaping what you sowed, was ground to dust beneath the factory's iron heel. The nature of work itself underwent a radical transformation. This shift from independent production to dependent wage labor had profound social and psychological consequences. Labor became less a skill and more a ritual. The artisan, once a proud maestro of his craft, a proud sorcerer of creation, was demoted to a mere cog, his skilled hands reduced to flicking levers in a monotonous fugue. Precision gave way to repetition, craft to compliance, and humans, poor, fragile meat machines, were slotted into endless assembly lines where their uniqueness was considered a design flaw. The complex tasks of production was sliced into simple, mindless, repetitive slivers of motion, a process that de-skilled and stripped labor of its soul. Workers were rendered interchangeable while losing their dignity. The autonomy of the craftsman gave way to the monotony and powerlessness of the factory hand, a sentiment that would fuel a growing sense of alienation. The craftsman's pride, that noble spark, was snuffed out, a resentment that simmered like a kettle left too long on the fire. Workplaces were hazardous playgrounds. Factories were perilous death traps. If you survived a day at the mill without losing a limb or contracting something unspeakable, you were considered lucky, or at least employed. Industrial accidents reaped workers like a scythe through wheat, claiming tens of thousands of lives annually. Meanwhile, the tenements festered, breeding disease, disheartenedness, and despondency as surely as they bred rats. And then, there were the robber barons, those swaggering titans of industry who amassed unprecedented fortunes that could make Croesus weep. While they lounged in their gilded parlors and marble palaces, sipping whiskey aged longer than the average factory worker's lifespan, the working stiffs slaved for wages that barely kept starvation at bay. In 1890, 11 million of America's 12 million families scraped by on less than $1,200 a year, hardly enough to keep body and soul together, barely sufficient for survival. And so, a great migration unfolded, from soil to smog, from independence to hierarchy, from artisan pride to existential dread. It was, in the grand cosmic sense, just another dance of illusion, one more story where mankind, ever so eager to trade dignity for convenience, got swept up in the rhythm of progress and found himself whistling in the dark. The grand American paradox, a nation reborn in the crucible of industry, its cities swelling with ambition and anguish, its people caught between the dream of progress and the grim reality of the grind. The Industrial Revolution, with its clanging machinery and soaring smokestacks, was both a triumph and a tragedy, a jest played on a people who thought they could outrun their own shadows, the chains of wage slavery. The factory, that grand clanking cathedral of progress, where the new industrial working class, bless their earnest, calloused souls, discovered the true meaning of hardship, a place of immense adversity and danger, a veritable palace of drudgery, where the proletariat's sweat and toil were extracted with all the finesse of a medieval leech. Their days were not merely long, they were an eternity, often stretching to 10 or 12 hours, 6 days a week, just enough time to forget the taste of freedom and the smell of fresh air. A schedule so utterly devoid of whimsy. And for what, pray tell? A pittance, a mere whisper of a wage, barely sufficient to keep body and soul from parting ways. Meager and barely enough to sustain a family, forcing women into the industrial ballet, a heartwarming tableau of familial unity, albeit one orchestrated by the grim maestro of economic necessity. Children, too, joined the workforce to supplement household incomes, because who needs education or a childhood anyway? By 1900, an estimated 1.7 million cherubic innocents under the age of 15 were employed in American industries, toiling in burgeoning industries, often in roles so perilous they made tightrope walking over a pit of hungry crocodiles seem like a leisurely stroll in the park. Workplace safety, that quaint notion, was virtually non-existent, a carnival of hazards, a game of industrial roulette where the prize was maiming or death. Unguarded machinery, a mechanical menagerie, whirred and whizzed, eager to snatch a limb or a life at whim. Lighting was an afterthought, a grudging concession to visibility. And ventilation? A concept as alien as personal liberty. The air was a thick, noxious brew of dust and toxic fumes served as a slow, insidious poison, ensuring a steady supply of chronic ailments and, ultimately, a rather unceremonious exit from this mortal coil. Nature's way of telling you to hold your breath and pray. Accidents, naturally, were as common as platitudes from a preacher. Injuries and fatalities, merely the cost of doing business, a statistical footnote in the grand ledger of progress. Accidents, and the unfortunate souls who emerged from these industrial skirmishes, maimed or, indeed, quite thoroughly deceased, were met with a profound silence, punctuated only by the distant clatter of gears and the rustle of uncompensated paperwork. This delightful state of affairs, this stark, unvarnished reality of industrial existence, birthed a concept so deliciously ironic it could only have sprung from the fertile ground of human suffering. The poetic phrase, wage slavery, a term that captured the essence of workers reduced to mere commodities, their labor sold like so many sacks of grain. Imagine, if you will, the erstwhile independent craftsman, a man who once knew the satisfying heft of his own tools and the quiet dignity of his self-made fortune, now reduced to a mere cog in a colossal, indifferent machine. His labor, once a testament to skill and artistry, became a commodity, a fungible unit of exertion, subject to the capricious whims of the market and the imperious dictates of the boss, a figure often possessing the charm of a dyspeptic bulldog and the empathy of a tax collector. The boss was the lord of the manor, doling out pittances and discipline with equal disdain. No American dream here, more like the American nightmare, a grueling existence of endless labor, with liberty and equality reserved only for the owners. No wonder the workers grew restless, their sense of injustice simmering like a pot about to boil over. Workers, who had once prided themselves on their independence, now found themselves entirely dependent on the factory owner for their livelihood. They sold their labor not as skilled craftsmen, but as commodities, subject to the whims of the market and the dictates of the boss. This profound forfeiture of autonomy, coupled with the brutal working conditions and the vast and growing chasm between the wealth of the factory magnates and the abject destitution of their tireless drones, created a fertile ground for social unrest. The term wage slave became not merely a phrase, but a rallying cry, a resonant declaration of unfairness, a powerful expression of the workers' sense of injustice, and their belief that the new industrial order was a betrayal of the Republican ideals of liberty and equality. In the smoky haze of the Industrial Revolution, they yearned for a life beyond mere survival, for a chance to breathe the air of freedom and taste the sweetness of autonomy. The factory might have been a marvel of efficiency, but it was a monument to inequality, and the workers would not be silenced.